October 25th, 2001, Utah. Paul Wayment and his 2-year-old son, Gage, lived in Salt Lake City, Utah. Paul was 37, a Mormon, and a father of 5. Paul enjoyed hunting, and he took little Gage on a hunting trip with him. Paul drove to a hunting site where he was a member. This site is remote, rugged, and even requires a passcode on a combination lock in order to gain access. The area is called Chalk Creek Basin. As Paul finds a hunting spot, he parks and realizes Gage is still sleeping. He decides he doesn't want to disturb him, and he lets him sleep. He shuts and locks the door and walks away. On his way to the hunting spot, he sees 2 hunters nearby. Between 30 minutes and 1 hour later, Paul heads back to his truck, where Gage is still sleeping. But as he's approaching his truck, he sees that the front door of his truck is wide open, and Gage is gone. Now, Paul said at the time, he thought to himself, how could Gage have gotten himself out of his car seat? How could he have opened the locked door and gotten out? Gage was only 2 years old, barely a toddler. Paul immediately starts looking around. Gage is just nowhere in sight. Paul remembered seeing 2 hunters about an hour prior, so he walks to find them. The 3 of them begin to look for Gage. After a while, one of the men leave to get the sheriff. Soon, dusk has arrived. The weather becomes colder, and the snow begins to fall. The sheriff arrives, and they only have one thing on their mind: to locate Gage. The search goes on through the night. The snow continues as they call and yell for little Gage. The Summit County Sheriff brought in helicopters and canine and scent dogs. There was over 100 searchers on the ground. They searched for 4 days straight. Gage, nor a single piece of evidence, was found. Paul was questioned intensely by police. He said right from the beginning, if something happened to my son, it's my fault. I was stupid. I left him in my truck thinking it was okay. Paul took accountability with deep regret. But this tragic story doesn't end here. 150 members of Paul's church then gathered to help search for Gage. A search volunteer named James Wilkes brought his dog along. While James and his dog are searching, he realizes that he's become lost. Soon, the sun begins to set and the temperature drops. Once it's nighttime, James decides to sit near a tree and huddle up with his dog for warmth. James barely managed to get a little bit of sleep. Upon sunrise, he awakens with his dog and decides to start trying to find his way back again. After walking just a few feet, James' dog stops and starts sniffing and licking the snow. James looks down, and he sees little Gage. How was Gage just feet away from James, and he had no idea this whole time? Gage was not fully covered by the snow. James said that Gage had frozen tears in his eyes, and that his eyes were open. James also noticed canine paw prints very close to Gage. How could multiple trained dogs miss Gage? He was not buried under the snow. James picked up Gage and carried him as he tried to find his way back. After a couple of hours, he spots a fence line and eventually meets up with the other searchers. After the sheriff recovered Gage and an autopsy was performed, they determined that the cause of death was hypothermia. Although they now know the cause of death, the coroner said he could not determine a time of death. So did Gage pass away 1 hour before he was found, or 3 days before he was found? And why was the coroner unable to determine the time of death? The sheriff's office decided not to charge his father, Paul, with a crime. However, the district attorney decided to charge Paul with misdemeanor negligent homicide, which I think is totally unfair. He lost his son. Maybe he didn't make the best choices, but his intent was not to kill his child. However, Paul went to court and he pled guilty. He was sentenced to 30 days in jail. This just feels like a man who is being punished twice. Now, this is just one of the many cases where the scenario is identical. In these missing 411 cases, the weather almost always turns bad soon after the person disappears. Scent dogs rarely ever catch their scent, and bodies are often found in places that have already been searched. Gage was found 2.5 miles from the truck that he had been in. How is it that a 2-year-old managed to walk so far in such rugged terrain? Sadly, not long after Gage's death, Paul Wayment killed himself. This entire case is so tragic and so very unfortunate. Law enforcement and Paul both agreed that they can't understand how a 2-year-old toddler could have gotten out of his car, opened the door, gotten out of the truck, and walked 2.5 miles. Both James and Paul were given a polygraph test, and they both passed. Let us try to learn something from this tragic case. What do you think happened to little Gage? May Paul and Gage rest in peace. Thank you guys for watching.